That's going to be okay. Right, so again, it's going to be 11 for part. That's where your benefits going to come in. How many of you, before you walked in today, had a chance to study population? You guys had a chance to review, bear input, and whatnot? All right. I appreciate your honesty. Here's what I'll say. Those of you guys who did that, that's exactly how you should be doing it. If you're not doing that, this will be notably less relevant to you because you haven't kind of stirred up all the new information that you really need to. All right, so again, just something to keep in mind as we go forward. You want to prepare for the week ahead of time for the kind of end review session. So anyway, population. A lot of the stuff the AP is going to ask you about is they're going to be looking at where population is located and why population matters. A couple things to keep in mind. Population and population issues are not universally distributed. Okay? We talk about population in overall numbers, but I want you guys to remember that some places are overpopulated and some places are underpopulated. Understanding growth rates, birth rates, death rates, fertility rates, the replacement rate, understanding all of that at the different scales is super important. If you have a question that's a free response question that asks you about population, make sure you distinguish the differences about what you're talking about, like regionally, what are the population issues might matter. Okay? It is not universally distributed. We know that most of our population exists where? Okay, that's a terrible question. I'm going to skip that for a second. I'm going to come to here. Cluster-wise, here are the 4 largest concentrations. East Asia, South Asia, Western Europe, Northeast North America. We call Northeast North America the megalopolis. That's a really fun term you can impress your parents with. Right? Those 4 areas are super important. Generally speaking, you're going to be talking about most people are going to be found along the coast. Right? So if you're trying to understand a free response question or a multiple choice question, and it were to ask you about population densities and whatnot, you kind of have to overlay in your head a physical map of the world, and that will give you some indication about where people will or will not be located. Sparse regions, what we call the dry lands or cold lands, so our Saharan region, people don't like to live in desert, too hot. All right, no good. People also don't like to live in the extreme north or the extreme south in the cold. So places like Greenland. Greenland, for instance, is inhabited basically on the southern edge of the country or of the island. The northern edge, it's not, or the northern to the central part. Also, our wetland region, so where we have dense rainforest, which is going to limit population density, as well as in our highland region. Highland's just a fancy term for mountains, right? Altitude changes as we work our way up. We're also going to find we have less population. That's probably intuitive for you. However, if you were to include that terminology in your writing, super powerful. Talk about the highlands. Talk about the cold lands. And use then the reference points. That's how you sound smart on a free response question. Okay? Good. Questions on that? If you guys have it, I'll take the sheets. I don't know why we're passing it in directions. Does anyone, if anyone hasn't signed it, I'll put it up in the front at the end, and you can just sign it. Do not sit on that for all right. So, oftentimes we talk about population in terms of population density. Okay? So, 2 different types of population density. One of them is arithmetic, and the other one is physiological. We'll talk about that one on the next one. Arithmetic population density is what we oftentimes assume. Number of people divided by the amount of land. Now, the amount of land can be done in any sort of unit. We talk about it in miles or in feet. Most of the world talks about it in meters or kilometers. Okay? Either way is interchangeable for us. So, the problem with arithmetic population density is it doesn't consider the distribution depending upon our scale. And it also doesn't consider physical features that would prevent people from living there. There aren't lots of mermaids in the water. All right? So we consider that in arithmetic population as we consider the surface area of the lake. That isn't probably the most beneficial way of considering where people are going to live in terms of its density. So what's a more powerful tool is our physiologic population density. Key term, key part to remember here, agricultural. We can also talk about it in terms of arable land. Those are 2 terms you're going to hear. Arable land is land in which you can farm. So, same number of people, but this time divided by areas in which we can actually produce food. That is by far the most powerful tool. The best example of that, the classic example, is Egypt. Most people live along the Nile or within maybe even a half a mile from the Nile. As we work further out there, big deserts, people don't like to live there. Very low population density. Okay. If we just considered all of Egypt's area, though, it would be very deceiving in terms of its population density. I think they say 98% lives on 2% of the land in Egypt, something to that effect. All right. Now, important person, got to know him, Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus is super important. Why? He basically says that we are going to run out of food. Oops. Basically, that food, and this is I know I drew this graph in class as well. When we talk about food, we're talking about something that is linear. This is our food supply. And we have this in terms of our population. Eventually, we are going to cross a point where our population exceeds our food. And he recognized that as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And more people were living longer, and our population was increasing. It was noticeable. So, he is a bit of an elitist, and he's been accused of that. And basically said if we want to prevent and slow down our population growth, we want to make sure that we have enough food, that the poor among us should produce less children. They're the ones that are going to be the most impacted by higher food prices and an inability to acquire food at a reasonable price. And so Malthus targets the poor in terms of kind of their social issues. In other words, they refer to it as moral restraint. Stop having kids. Stop it. Stop it. Just stop it. All right? And he encourages them to do that because the belief was that the poor, if they produced more than those who could afford it, would be a greater problem on earth. A bunch of people took that up. They are called neo-Malthusian. Ooh, that's a fancy term. Now, just like neo-colonialism is colonialism, but it's not, but it has like all those similar properties. It looks like colonialism, it smells like colonialism, it tastes like colonialism. We don't call it colonialism because it doesn't exist anymore. Same thing happens with Malthus. And there's been a lot of geographers who have followed in his footsteps and who have basically pushed a lot of his ideas along. This guy, this Ehrlich guy, he comes up a couple of different times, super important in population geography. He writes a book called The Population Bomb. And basically the idea was that there's going to be an explosion of population growth to the point that the earth can't handle it. Now his prediction, oops, wrong, right? Hundreds of millions died from overcrowding in the 1970s. Life expectancy in the U.S. would dip to 42 years by the 1980s. He was only off by about 30 years for men and about 36 or 35 years for women. Oops. But the idea was that population was still a powerful concept to understand. To look at it visually, this is the population bomb, right? That we are going to have this gradual growth, and then there's going to be the explosion. This is super important. Where is that explosion going to occur? In the developing world. Who is the least capable of handling the population explosion? The developing world. And I think that's a super important part about his book, if you want to kind of sum it up in just a few kind of succinct sentences. But this is our huge problem. So our population growth, the argument has been and continues to be, and in all honesty is truthful, that our greatest population growth occurs in our developing world. Now, I'll talk about them a little bit more when we talk about demographic transition. So, here are some terms you got to know. Okay, ready for acronyms? Here's what's super important to remember about your free response writing. You cannot use an acronym. You cannot use an acronym without defining what the acronym is. Unless in the question stem they refer to the acronym. So if in the question stem it says something about the crude birth rate in parentheses CBR, and they continue on with their question, then you could use it. But I'm going to tell you this all the time. You should always write it out, and then afterwards, if you know you're going to use it multiple times, show the abbreviation and work from there. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Was the dash they're the same thing?
Yes, this should have been a slash as well. I probably should have put a slash in there. Yeah. So crude birth rate, or what we call our total fertility rate. Those two words are synonyms for each other. Okay? Number of births per some number. Number of births per births. I don't know what that means. Well, that's a per birth there. Number of births per births. I don't know what that means. In any event, number of births per 1,000 people is oftentimes kind of a standard. But again, they can mix that up. To give you guys an idea, I think this is kind of important. If you kind of want to have an idea of, well, how many children, and the production of how many children equates to a lot, a little, or kind of in the middle. They consider more than 30 a high number, less than 18 a low number. Globally, we're at 20.15. So we're a little bit above our low point. So we're still growing, but we're not kind of at that excessive rate. And again, you guys get the examples up there. Opposite, crude death rate. We'll also call that our total mortality rate. You can tell I copy and pasted that first part there. Okay. Talking about deaths. I know I've used this in my class before, but you're all going to die. I know. Go home and tell mom and dad that. Just what Shepherd made me feel good. I'm going to die. Right? So we can't get rid of mortality. We can't get rid of our death rates. However, the more industrialized country, the lower our death rate is going to be. So in some places, like, I think this is fascinating. In Kuwait, the total mortality rate per 1,000 people is 2.42. So they live a pretty long life. Like, they seem to be around a lot. Can't get rid of the Kuwaitis. Unless Iraq invades, but that's another story. Sorry, humor related to football for it. Not funny, but I know your audience. Now, yeah, I know it's number of deaths. It should be the number of deaths per 1,000. Yeah, 0. The other term that you have to kind of know here is when they refer to infant mortality. Infant refers to those that are under 1 year of age. Okay, so when you see the word infant, that's what they're talking about. Okay, why do they call it crude, by the way? Doesn't age or sex don't matter in this case. Now, we can use this information in order to figure out our rate of natural increase, or our RNI. So our crude birth rate minus our crude death rate is a positive number. We have growth. If it's a negative number, we have decline. Notice that when we talk about natural increase, the exception to that is migration. Migration is not part of it. And that's a super important point if you had to write about that or address that in some sort of multiple choice question. That if they talk about what is natural, migration is not considered. Now, the super important number for geographers is what they call the replacement rate, or the number of people that it takes per woman, number of children a woman would have to produce in order to maintain its current population levels. I actually found this out in my own research, and I kind of taught it not entirely correct. That number does vary, and I guess I just kind of took that for granted. The number that we always talk about is 2.1. 2.1 is the replacement rate in industrialized countries because we live longer lives and we have slower growth rates and whatnot. In our developing world, you'll notice that number is almost a half to a full child more per woman in order to maintain their current population. They live shorter lives because they die from disease and whatnot. So globally, it's around 2.3 if you want to maintain the global population's current growth. ZPG, or zero population growth, another term. This is a term that came up if you looked in your terms, demographic momentum. Demographic momentum is basically the lag time that exists. If you remember, in our population pyramid, when we're looking at our population pyramids, and we always talked about that critical group, the 21 to 34 group, the 20 to 34 group, and this was the group that was responsible for the production of children, prime child rearing years. If we were to trace this out, so 15 years later, we need to then monitor where these numbers eventually end up. So it takes 15 years to 20 or 25 or 30 years to find out where exactly your population is growing. Because we don't know how many children the current children are going to have when they're a prime child rearing years. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Clear as mud? All right, your lack of response means either you're comatose or you're okay with it. So, all right, so that's the demographic momentum. I like to think of it like a wave. Powerful wave coming in, You don't know that until it starts to hit the land and starts to rise up. It takes time for that.